December 19, 1944. Inside a converted barracks in Verdun, the most powerful generals in the Allied command sit around a table in silence. No one is smiling. Just 3 days earlier, over 200,000 German troops had smashed through American lines in the Ardennes. Entire units were being overrun. Communications were collapsing. Bastogne was surrounded. If that town fell, German armor could split the Allied armies in two and push straight to the coast. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower breaks the silence with a single question. How soon can someone attack north to relieve Bastogne? Maps are studied. Distances calculated. Roads, fuel, weather, and chaos wait in silence. Every general in the room knows the truth. There isn't enough time. Then George S. Patton speaks. I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours. The room freezes. Why this works as a hook? It drops the viewer directly into a moment of crisis, not background or build-up. The stakes are immediately clear. Defeat could unravel the entire Western Front. A ticking clock is established. Paired with a promise that sounds impossible, the hook creates instant cognitive dissonance. Every experienced commander in the room knows this can't be done. Patton insists it already is. Patton's words hung in the air long after he spoke them. 40-8 hours. That was how long he claimed it would take to turn an entire army north, disengage from active combat, and smash into the strongest German thrust on the Western Front. To the men around the table, it sounded less like confidence and more like theater. They knew the math. You couldn't peel divisions off the line without chaos. You couldn't reroute supply columns overnight. You certainly couldn't do it in the worst winter Europe had seen in decades. Snow choked the roads, ice crippled engines, visibility grounded aircraft. Every assumption, said Patton, was promising something no commander could deliver. But the mistake wasn't in the numbers. It was in assuming. Patton was improvising 10 days. Earlier, in a quiet headquarters in Nancy, France, Colonel Oscar Koch laid a series of maps across Patton's desk. Koch wasn't dramatic. He didn't raise his voice or embellish his findings. He simply pointed out what was missing. 15 German divisions had vanished. These weren't exhausted formations pulled back to refit. They were full-strength units, including armored divisions with hundreds of tanks. They had disappeared from Allied intelligence tracking without explanation. Higher headquarters had a theory. The Germans were holding them in reserve. Defensive insurance. A reaction force. Koch didn't believe it. German doctrine didn't work that way. Armies preparing to collapse didn't hide 15 divisions. Armies preparing to attack did. Koch traced a finger across the map and stopped in the Ardennes, a quiet, forested stretch of front held thinly by American units. It was exactly the kind of place Allied planners dismissed as unsuitable for a winter offensive. That was the danger. In 1940, the Germans had used the same terrain to destroy France. Koch laid out the evidence calmly. Radio traffic had increased. Prisoners mentioned unfamiliar units. Civilians reported night movements behind German lines. Each clue alone was inconclusive. Together they formed a pattern. Patton listened without interrupting. When Koch finished, Patton asked one question. When? Within 2 weeks. Patton called his superior, Omar Bradley, and relayed the assessment. Bradley listened and rejected it. Intelligence at the highest level said Germany was finished. The war was nearly won. A massive counteroffensive was impossible. Patton ended the call and turned back to Koch. He didn't argue. He didn't debate. He issued an order, start planning. For the next 10 days, Third Army planners worked quietly. They didn't broadcast their preparations. They didn't alert neighboring commands. They built 3 complete contingency plans, each one detailed down to road junctions, fuel dumps, and marching schedules. They planned for an attack that officially didn't exist. At dawn on December 16th, the Ardennes erupted. A deep, rolling thunder swept through the frozen forests as German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front. Shells crashed into American foxholes, command posts, and supply routes with a violence not seen since Normandy. Infantry followed close behind, emerging from the mist and snowfall. Then came the tanks, Panthers, and Tigers grinding forward through terrain the Allies had declared impassable. Entire American units were caught in transition. Some were refitting. Others were rotating off the line. Many were under strength, manned by green replacements who had never heard a shot fired in anger. The Ardennes had been chosen precisely because it was considered quiet. A place to rest, not to fight. Within hours, the illusion collapsed. Communication lines failed almost immediately. Telephone wires were cut by shell fire. Radio signals were swallowed by the dense forests and winter storms. Headquarters lost contact with frontline regiments, then with entire divisions. Orders went out that never arrived. Requests for support went unanswered. Confusion spread faster than any directive could control it. At first, the reports were dismissed. Local counterattacks. Probing actions. A limited German effort designed to relieve pressure elsewhere. That was the assumption. It had to be. The alternative that the Wehrmacht had launched a full-scale offensive was unthinkable. So late in the war, but the reports kept coming, and they grew worse. Entire regiments had surrendered after being surrounded and cut off. The 106th Infantry Division, holding a critical sector, was shattered within days. 2 of its regiments were wiped out or captured almost intact. Bastogne, the road junction everything depended on, was encircled. 7 major highways converged there. Lose Bastogne, and the German advance could fan out in every direction. The scale of the attack became impossible to ignore. Across Allied headquarters, disbelief gave way to alarm. Alarm hardened into panic. Officers scrambled for maps that no longer reflected reality. Units that were supposed to exist had vanished. Others appeared on reports far from where they were expected to be. No one could say with confidence where the front line actually was, only that it was moving west. For months, Allied planning had been built on a single assumption: the Germans were finished. Short on fuel, short on men. Capable of defense, perhaps, but not of bold maneuver. That assumption died in the snow of the Ardennes, except at Third Army. When the first reports crossed George S. Patton's desk, he did not react with surprise. He read them carefully, then handed them to his Chief of Staff, General Hobart Gay. Patton turned to his operations officer, Colonel Koch, and spoke quietly. "They're going for Bastogne." It was not a question. Patton had spent weeks arguing that the Germans still had one punch left. He had warned that the Ardennes was exactly where they would strike thin defenses. Poor weather and overconfidence on the Allied side. While others dismissed the idea, Patton prepared. Now, the moment had arrived. He did not ask what should be done. He already knew. Orders went out almost immediately. Units disengaged from combat in the Saar, where Third Army had been pushing toward the German border. Entire divisions were told to pivot 90 degrees in the middle of winter. Supply columns were rerouted overnight. Fuel allocations were rewritten. Artillery battalions were assigned new assembly areas. Engineers prepared roads. No one had expected to use. It was a logistical nightmare, and it worked. While other headquarters debated possibilities, Third Army moved. Trucks rolled through snow and ice without headlights. Infantry marched through freezing nights. Tank crews slept beside their vehicles, engines idling to prevent them from freezing solid. The pivot was unprecedented in scale and speed. 3 days after the attack began, Dwight Eisenhower convened an emergency meeting at Verdun. The atmosphere was grim. Maps covered the table, layered with grease pencil markings that grew more chaotic by the hour. Reports arrived as the meeting began and continued arriving as it went on. Each one painted the same picture. The front was bent, cracking, and dangerously close to breaking, but Eisenhower understood something crucial. The German army, in pushing so far west, had exposed itself. Its flanks were thin. Its supply lines were stretched. If the Allies could strike quickly before the Germans consolidated, the offensive could be contained, then crushed. That was the problem. Speed. Eisenhower asked the question directly. How soon could someone attack north to relieve Bastogne and strike the German flank? Silence filled the room. Commanders exchanged glances. Some spoke cautiously of days, others of weeks. Weather, logistics, exhaustion, there were reasons for delay, and plenty of them. Then Patton spoke. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hedge. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours. The room went still. The claim sounded impossible. Units did not simply disengage, reorient, and attack in winter conditions on command. Not at that scale? Not that fast. When challenged, Patton revealed the truth. The orders had already been given. The plans already written. The movement already underway. This was not confidence. It was preparation. Patton had not guessed right. He had prepared for the moment when assumptions collapsed. Everyone else was forced to catch up. The pivot of Third Army began on the night of December 19th. Orders moved faster than the weather. Under blackout conditions, columns of vehicles rolled out of their positions in the Saar and turned north into a landscape buried under snow and ice. Roads designed for carts and farm traffic suddenly carried the weight of tanks, artillery, fuel trucks, and ambulances. More than 100,000 men were in motion, threading their way through frozen villages, whose residents watched in silence as the war returned to their doorsteps. Nothing about the movement was smooth. Engines froze in the night. Tracks snapped under strain. Trucks slid into ditches and blocked narrow roads for hours. Wreckers worked continuously, dragging vehicles free while traffic stacked up behind them. Soldiers marched with frostbitten hands, numb feet, and weapons that had to be disassembled and cleaned just to keep them firing. Many had not slept properly in days. And still, the columns moved. This was not a desperate scramble. It was not chaos held together by bravado. Every route had been calculated weeks earlier. Alternate roads were already assigned. Traffic control points had been marked. Military police knew where each division would pass and when. Engineers had prepared bridges for loads they were never meant to carry. What looked like improvisation from the outside was, in reality, execution. Patton's headquarters tracked the movement hour by hour. When delays occurred, and they always did, units were rerouted without waiting for permission. When weather grounded aircraft, ground units adjusted without complaint. Third Army had been trained to move, to adapt, and to keep moving no matter the cost. By December 21st, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division were in position south of Bastogne. They had covered distances that planners said were impossible under winter conditions. They had done it without breaking cohesion. And they had done it while the enemy was still advancing. Less than 48 hours later, they attacked. The German defenses around Bastogne were thick and well prepared. Infantry dug into forests and villages overlooking the approaches. Anti-tank guns covered the roads. Panzer units waited behind hedgerows and ridgelines, ready to counterattack. Every mile was contested. American armor pushed forward anyway. Shermans clashed with German tanks in frozen fields where visibility dropped to yards at a time. Infantry fought from tree line to tree line, clearing positions one at a time. Artillery fired at maximum rates, barrels glowing in the cold. Shells crashing into German strongpoints buried beneath the snow. Progress was measured in yards, not miles, inside Bastogne. The situation was desperate. The 101st Airborne Division had been rushed in without winter clothing, short on ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. Wounded men filled basements and cellars. Artillery shells were rationed. Food was stretched to the limit. The skies remained overcast, denying them the air resupply they desperately needed. The Germans knew it. On December 22nd, they sent a formal demand for surrender. The message promised annihilation if resistance continued. It was delivered under a white flag, with full confidence that the defenders had no other option. The reply was handwritten. One word: nuts. It was bravado, humor, and defiance rolled into a single sentence. More importantly, it was true. The men inside Bastogne were not waiting to be rescued. They were waiting to hold out long enough for Third Army to arrive on December 26th. The waiting ended. An American tank from the 4th Armored Division broke through the German lines near the village of Ardennes. It was not a dramatic charge. It was a grinding advance, paid for in lives and steel. But when the lead vehicle rolled into Bastogne, the siege was over. That night, supply convoys followed the breakthrough. Trucks carrying ammunition, food, fuel, and medical supplies poured into the town. Wounded men were evacuated. Artillery batteries were reinforced. Bastogne was no longer isolated. The German timetable collapsed. The Battle of the Bulge would rage on for weeks. The fighting remained brutal. Casualties mounted on both sides, and winter claimed lives as surely as bullets. But the moment the siege was broken, the initiative shifted. The German offensive had lost its momentum, and with it its chance of success after the war. German commanders admitted the truth. They had expected confusion. They had expected delay. They had expected an Allied command paralyzed by surprise. What they had not expected was an American army already moving, an army that had planned for a crisis no one believed would come. They had not expected. Patton. There were no special medals awarded for the pivot. No grand ceremony to mark the movement of Third Army. Colonel Koch remained unknown to the public. Staff officers who made the plans faded back into obscurity, but within the military, the lesson endured. Intelligence means nothing if it is ignored. Preparation means everything if it is trusted. And when the impossible arrives, only those who planned for it can make it routine. Good intelligence only matters if someone is willing to listen. In the weeks leading up to December 16th, reports from the front were streaming in constantly. Skirmishes in the Ardennes, unusual troop movements, increases in German rail traffic, all of it was noted, filed, and interpreted. Most of the time, these signals were filtered through layers of assumption. Analysts expected what they had seen before: probing attacks, localized offensives, small-scale harassment. Nothing indicated the storm about to break. Oscar Koch, Patton's chief intelligence officer, saw things differently. He didn't just file the reports. He connected the dots. He looked past what the data should mean, past the convenient assumptions that most officers clung to. Koch recognized patterns that suggested an audacious plan, a major offensive, one that could strike deep into Allied lines and threaten the fragile balance in the Ardennes. He read the maps, studied German troop dispositions, and noted the unusual timing of movements. His analysis made its way up the chain of command. General Omar Bradley received briefings. Allied headquarters in Belgium reviewed Koch's reports, and almost without exception, they dismissed them. The reports were too radical, too disruptive to accepted doctrine. The Ardennes? That's quiet, they said. The Germans are on the defensive. Nothing major will happen here. But Patton didn't dismiss it. He didn't merely nod politely and carry on with assumptions. He trusted Koch not blindly, but with the informed judgment of a commander who had seen how war often defied expectation. More importantly, Patton prepared for the possibility that everyone else might be wrong. Preparation doesn't happen in a vacuum. Patton's staff worked through scenarios, logistics, and contingencies long before the German attack landed. Routes were mapped. Supply lines calculated. Unit rotations and assembly areas designated. Every what-if had an answer ready. It wasn't improvisation. It was deliberate readiness. When Eisenhower convened the emergency meeting at Verdun, the generals around the table stared in disbelief. The situation was dire. Reports indicated that entire American divisions were surrounded. Bastogne was under siege, and the Germans were advancing faster than anticipated. Eisenhower asked, "How soon can someone strike north?" Silence filled the room. Then Patton spoke. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours. There was no hesitation. No qualifying statements. No hedging. The plans were in motion. The orders were already issued. The units were already pivoting north through frozen roads and snow-covered terrain. Patton wasn't guessing. He was reporting on the reality his preparation had created. This moment illustrates a fundamental truth of warfare. Intelligence is only as valuable as the action it inspires. Reports can arrive in stacks of paper or flicker across teletypes. But if nobody trusts them, or worse, if they are ignored entirely, they are worthless. Patton didn't just understand what the information said. He acted on it. He challenged assumptions, and in doing so, changed the course of the battle. The Ardennes offensive was not merely a failure of German planning or luck. It was a failure of imagination among the Allied leadership at large. They were shackled by conventional thinking, unwilling to acknowledge the unthinkable until it was too late. Patton, however, had already accounted for it. He didn't wait for confirmation from distant headquarters. He acted decisively, leveraging the intelligence in his possession to seize the initiative. In the end, Patton's response wasn't luck, it was preparation. He understood that wars are decided not by those who assume the world will conform to expectations, but by those who question those assumptions and act when others hesitate. Others had the same information, but only one man trusted it enough to turn analysis into action. This lesson resonates far beyond the Ardennes. In military history, intelligence is only powerful when coupled with leadership willing to act. Data without initiative is noise. Insight without decisiveness is wasted. Patton's genius was not in predicting the attack he didn't need to. His genius was in trusting his team, preparing for worst-case scenarios, and moving before disaster became visible to everyone else. In war, as in life, preparation is never luck. It is everything. This is WW2 Rewind, where we revisit the moments that changed the war and the decisions that made the difference.